These are the Mod 6 notes, sampling technique. You will notice a lot of definitions on this front page. I am definitely not going to read those to you. Please feel free at this time to pause this recording. Make sure you read through this and then come back so we can fill in some of the important information for you. So whenever we want to do a study, typically it is not cost effective and not reasonable to figure that we can interview or sample or collect data from every single member of a population. So we choose a sample that is representative of the population, or as representative as we can get it. Some sampling methods will produce samples that are more representative than others. Sometimes that can be helped and sometimes it cannot. What's important is that you acknowledge the flaws in your sampling technique and where you may have some issues. Okay. So to start here, we're talking about a case study. We are looking to determine musical preferences of students at the university. These are not the only ways we could sample students, but this gives you an idea of what we're talking about. Okay. Here, we acknowledge what a volunteer sample looks like. Our respondents are volunteering to participate. We are talking about convenience sampling, choosing those that are easy for us to get to. Systematic sampling, where we have a system for choosing every third or every seventh or every 50th person in our population. And then a simple random sample, which is typically the goal and what we are looking for so that we have a sample that best represents our entire population. So we're going to start with our convenience sample. A convenience sample is a type of non-probability sampling that involves sampling part of a population that is easily accessible. The way to think about this is if I am planning a family reunion for my siblings, their kids, our parents, but I sit down at the table with my family to ask about potential things to do, where we might want to go, where we might want to eat, those types of things. I am doing a convenience sampling because my family is there and readily available for answering those questions and helping to make those decisions. Okay. We are talking about 4 different types of sampling techniques in this class. We have, first off, the simple random sample. Where we just randomly choose members of our population. If you take a look at the Excel support in D2L, you will see directions for how to use Excel for creating a simple random sample. Okay, a lot of times when we eyeball it and just choose the 3rd one and then the 7th one and then the 11th, we really are not being completely random. keeping in mind that if we have a computer program doing it for us, there is some sort of algorithm behind it, but sometimes that is the best we can do, okay? In a simple random sample, every single individual has the same opportunity to be chosen. So we have example 1. I am not going to read this to you. There is something that I do want to point out though. If we are talking about every possible group of 3 from her 6 friends, then each of these groups of 3 is a separate sample. Okay. In this case, each group of 3 is equally likely to happen. We've created a table that has every possible combination of 3 of her friends. Okay, so each of those 3s is called a sample. The entire thing together is our sampling distribution. Second one we have is the systematic sample, where we literally just select every kth individual, nth individual. We choose a number, and as people walk through the door or as we're looking through the phone book, we are going to choose every 7th or every 50th data value that we come on. Okay. So our example 2, and I'm going to kind of go backwards. We're going to define a frame first. A frame is a list of all those within a population who can be sampled. So if I am looking through the phone book, those individuals in alphabetical order are my frame. Okay. So example 2, obtaining a systematic sample without a frame. If we are looking at all of the customers coming into a Kroger food store, I don't start the day knowing that I'm going to have exactly 384 customers so that I can divide that evenly. So we can just decide how far apart we want them to be, and we could survey every 4th customer to come through the door. Until we hit 40. It is important that we have an idea of what the whole population was. That 4th customer, until we hit 40, we're talking, under 200 customers walking in. We may just get those customers that frequent the store in the morning, and we may not hit any of our afternoon, evening, or late evening customers. So still important to have an idea of the big picture as we choose whatever that N or that K is going to be. We have 2 more which are easy to mix up for students. First one is cluster sampling. Okay. This is used when the population is naturally divided into groups, which we are calling clusters. We randomly pick clusters and use every single member in the cluster as part of the sample. And one of my favorite examples to use with cluster sampling is if I am looking at a school district Suppose there are 12 elementary schools and 5 middle schools and 2 high schools. Each of those separate buildings, those separate schools, would be considered a cluster. So if I went to sample, I might choose randomly from the schools and end up with 4 schools total. Okay. And so you have another example here, example 3, that discusses a different way to look at, well, a different example to use in terms of a cluster sample when we're viewing entire city blocks as our clusters. Last one we're going to look at here is the stratified sample. Sometimes strata normally happens within a population. Okay. And that is when our population at whole is divided into subpopulations. So we go back to my example of the school district, clearly divided into strata. Elementary schools, what did I say, 12? We had our 12 elementary schools, our 5 middle schools, our 2 high schools. If we were doing a stratified sample, we would make sure that we chose a percentage of elementary school students to have those voices reflected, and then a percentage of the middle school students, and then a percentage of the high school students. And from each of those groups, we randomly select. Okay. So we've got, apologize for the examples not happening in order. I pulled them from a different text. So example 1 down here, which has got a stratified sample using DePaul University and the community's opinion regarding campus safety. Again, I am not going to read that to you. Notice though, down here, they identify the strata. Non-resident students, staff, and resident students. Going backwards here. So that is how our population is divided. Okay, at the bottom here, is there one technique that's inherently better than others? No. Sometimes you're limited by resources, you're limited by time, you do your best, and you acknowledge where biases may occur. So the last page, we are going to talk about bias. Okay? And our 3 main types of bias. We have sampling bias. If there is a flaw in the way that the sample was chosen, we may accidentally favor one group over another. Okay. If I am sampling classes at CCD and I am looking for information on how students think they're going to use math after school, I will probably get very different results if I sample students that are in STEM field-based classes versus students that are not. Okay. So it is important that we choose our sample carefully and try to get a representative of the population as a whole. Second kind of bias is our non-response bias. This happens when people do not respond. Okay, this can be by choice. Suppose I sent a survey out to all of the students in my class and only half of them returned it. I am getting responses from those students who are potentially passionate about my question or topic, which is going to skew the nature of my results. It could also be that people were not responding because they did not have the opportunity to. So if phone calls are being made home, and they're being made home during the day, during normal business working hours, there is the chance that we are missing the part of the population that is away working during those normal business hours. Okay? So we have bias built in based on those that did not respond. Last kind of bias is a response bias. This happens when we do get a response, but we are not convinced that it is a true response. Okay. So a lot of times, without building a relationship, we may ask a question that somebody is uncomfortable asking, uncomfortable answering. In this political client, asking in a crowded restaurant whether somebody is Democrat or Republican may put somebody on the spot to try to respond in a way that they feel is acceptable in the environment, may not reflect their true feelings. One of my favorite is that example of the online dating shows. When a question is asked, the response may be geared towards more of what they think the population or the viewing public wants to hear rather than how they truly feel. Different ways to have response bias. Please make sure you read through all these examples so that you can differentiate between the types of biases.